On today's show, I am joined by Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops and ATL 129 to discuss the player capsules with regard to Garrison Matthews. And before that, a little bit of NBA draft lottery preview because that is coming up on Sunday. We'll get into all that and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1711 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Thursday evening into Friday here in early to mid-May. And today's show is brought to you by the folks at Monopoly Go, the fast-paced game that lets you team up with your friends for tournaments, unlock awesome prizes. Download the Monopoly Go app right now for free on Google Play or the App Store. It is game on with Monopoly Go. Also want to encourage you at the top of the podcast, as I always would, to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to Locked On Hawks podcast anywhere you might find your podcasts. That includes Apple, that includes Spotify. We're also on YouTube on the video side, and again, anywhere you might find your podcasts. Today's show is mostly going to be myself and Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops, ATL 29, talking about Garrison Matthews as a continuation of our player capsule series. If you missed it, we've already done capsules on the likes of Mo Gay, AJ Griffin, Seth Lundy, Wes Matthews, et cetera, et cetera. Those are already in the archive. The big guns are still to come, a little bit more of a deep dive. And if you missed that, basically the concept is we'll be diving into these guys with some real depth about what they did this last year, projections in the future, contract stuff, skill sets, et cetera. Always fun to talk to Glenn. But first, a little bit of news coming up because there's a big event that's happening on Sunday. So the NBA draft lottery is Sunday afternoon. Usually it's on a Tuesday. This time around, they're changing that. It's a Sunday afternoon slot, 3 p.m. Eastern time on ABC, national TV, just before Knicks-Pacers Game 4. And goes without saying, there isn't as much hype this year because no Wembanyama in the draft, no Zion, whatever. This is not the best draft in the world. I discussed that quite a bit on a couple of shows this week already. I had Richard Stayman on the show this week, as well as a mailbag episode in which I answered a question in the second half of that podcast about the draft. So plenty already in the archive about the draft. But the Hawks are number 10 entering the lottery on the board. That means that they cannot pick, at least coming into the draft, at 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9. But they technically can be 1, 2, 3, or 4, and it could be 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14, technically in this draft class. The most likely spot is to stay put at 10. If you are reading mock drafts or projections, the Hawks have a 65.9% chance of picking number 10, which is where they are already in the class. So there you go. That's the most likely scenario, almost 2/3 of the time. Then at number 11 is the next most likely scenario. That's actually about 19%. That means that there's about an 85-ish% chance to pick at either 10 or number 11. But so there are some rosier projections. Honestly, to be in the top 4, there's a 4% chance at number 4 overall, a 3.6% chance at number 3, a 3.3% chance at number 2, and a 3.0% chance to pick number 1 in this draft. Then, by the way, they have a 1.2% chance to pick at number 12, and then an infinitesimal percentage to pick at number 13 or 14. It is possible, but it would be incredibly unlucky and unlikely because it would basically mean that 3 or 4 teams below the Hawks will all have to go into the top 4. That just is not probably going to happen. Assume if it does, there you go. Anyway, those are the slot odds. The top 4 combined percentage is about 14% or so, 13.9. That means that 86% or higher is 10 or below. So keep your expectations within reason, I would say. The plan coming in, if you're a Hawks fan projecting, if you're the team, you have to assume you're picking 10, maybe 11. But obviously there's some upside beyond that. The draft is actually 7 weeks away or so. It's June 26th and June 27th, the first round on the first night. Currently, the Hawks only have 1 pick, and it's this lottery pick. They don't have a second-round pick, although that definitely could change. It's not super difficult to acquire second-rounders or make other trades, so stay tuned. But anyway, a 2-night draft for the first time, June 26th, June 27th, about 7 weeks away. And still, even if they don't have lottery luck on Sunday, an opportunity to add a quality prospect to the mix at 10, 11, 12, etc. It would change things a little bit if it broke the more positive way into the top 4, a little bit higher cap hold. You're paying more, better prospects, presumably, obviously. So all that said, I'll have a show on Sunday evening into Monday reacting to all that and getting a sort of full steam ahead into draft content. I've sort of dabbled so far in draft stuff with Richard Stayman. I had Ben Pfeiffer on the show. I've had Brian Schroeder on the show. We'll have more guests. It's going to be wall-to-wall draft stuff from basically Monday until the draft. but stay tuned for that, and that's coming up. In fact, I got a question briefly from Rob via the mailbag that's lottery preview related. So I'll dive into that now quickly before I get to Glenn. And the question is, should the Hawks be rooting against the Spurs in the lottery? It's a little bit strange. And honestly, Rob, I haven't thought about this a whole lot until now, but I think technically they probably should be rooting against the Spurs on some level. Now, I've given all the caveats about how there isn't a true number one in this class. I believe that to be true. Alex Sarr is my favorite prospect right now, but not a huge like Wemby, Zion level number one in this class. But still, the Spurs have a 10.5% chance of winning the lottery this year. Why do we care about this? Well, and why is the question even coming? It's because of the DeJounte trade. 2 of those picks the Hawks owe to the Spurs are already unprotected. They're gone in 25 and 27. But there is an unprotected swap in 26. That means if the Hawks are worse than the Spurs that year, the Spurs can swap picks unilaterally. So let's just say in a doomsday scenario, the Spurs win the championship in 25-26 with Wemby and whatever. And the Hawks are awful that year. Again, this is doomsday. I'm not projecting that. Even if that were to happen, let's say the Hawks have the number 2 pick in the draft and the Spurs are picking 29 or 30. They still have to swap, and that is a huge downturn. Obviously, most scenarios are not that drastic, but that swap is an undercovered portion of that DeJounte trade, in which I made it clear even the day that it happened. The Hawks overpaid in that deal. It looks even worse now. That's for another day. But they owe those 2 picks, plus they have this swap that's lingering out there. And because the Spurs got Wemby, and now they're looking to be pretty good for a long time, there's a little bit of disaster risk there, but multifaceted here. Number one, the Hawks can't control anything with the Spurs. That bit of deal, that deal is done. There's stuff to root for, but there's no upside in the swap. It's one way. If the Hawks are worse than the Spurs, the pick will switch. If the Hawks are better than the Spurs, nothing really happens. There you go. But it's funny to think about this. I think, though, ideally, you wouldn't necessarily want the Spurs to get another top 3 pick in this draft. Now, this is not the worst draft for that to be the case, but let's say in 2026, you'd rather, for downside risk purposes, the Spurs not be great at that point in time. That way, if the Hawks are not terribly great at that point in time either, the swap only goes from, let's say, 10 to 15 or from 5 to 16 or whatever it is versus 2 to 29. So it's nerdy. I'm not saying you should dwell on this a lot, but I think if you ask me, all things equal, would you like the Spurs as the Hawks to win the lottery on Sunday? I would say no, you wouldn't want that, because at least you can sort of push it back a little bit. Maybe the Spurs won't be that good until 27 or later. It doesn't really matter that much, but I thought it was an interesting question. And it was also the only time to answer it on the podcast was now, because the lottery is, again, on Sunday afternoon. It's funny to think about, but, by the way, there's more invested, I would say, for the Hawks in the short term in monitoring what the Kings are doing than the Spurs, because the Kings have that pick that they owe the Hawks that is protected the next 2 years, then become second-round picks. I'll have that story re-upped again for next year because that pick is not conveying. So right now, it's the only pick the Hawks have for 2025. But we'll cover that along the way. The Kings are also in the lottery right now. Less downside, less impact, I would say, for the short-term future. But keep an eye on that as well. But anyway, there you go. All I would say is ideally the Spurs would not become a full-fledged juggernaut from the Hawks' perspective before 2026. But with Wemby, all things are possible. And there you have it. All right. We'll have Glen Willis coming up in a second to talk all about Garrison Mathews in deep dive 2-part fashion. So, by the way, stay tuned at the end of part 1, because part 2 will be available right away in your podcast feed of choice. Please subscribe to the show right now. And without any further delay, here we go. Work from our partners. I'll be back with myself and Glenn. Today's show is sponsored by Yahoo Finance. Let's straight to the point here. You want to grow your portfolio to deal with the rising costs of inflation, maybe to pay off your debts, perhaps pay off your mortgage. Really can be anything standing in the way of you and your financial freedom. And with Yahoo Finance, you can get access to the news, data, and tools that you need in order to reach that level of financial freedom that you're actually seeking. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance that you might need to get over the top, Yahoo Finance gives you all the details and the tools and the data that you need in one place. They're the number one finance destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. I can securely put my brokerage accounts with our unified view of my wealth, including 401k and other investments, as well as a comprehensive perspective. And that's really what sets apart great investors. It's also how Yahoo Finance ensures that you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you get on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, and that is yahoofinance.com. The number one destination in finance is yahoofinance.com. That is yahoofinance.com. I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis of ATL and 29. Glen, how are you on this Thursday evening?
Yeah, good. Few days away from the ping pong balls. And so I know everyone's interested to see how that pans out.
Yes. Before I bring you into the show, I will have recorded already a segment on the lottery. It's kind of funny to do a lottery preview because it's like, here are the odds, and that's kind of all you can do. It's a pivotal day for the Hawks. I know you well enough to know that you are not sweating bullets right now about the lottery on Thursday evening going into Sunday afternoon. But all I can say is that it could be impactful. It could be nothing. It could just be exactly what we expect it to be, and the Hawks pick 10th or 11th in 7 weeks. Or if they get lucky, they're in the top 4 and things change. So that's kind of all I got. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. And I don't know when this is gonna. I guess it's gonna post what we're doing. I'm doing you and I are both, I think, doing a kind of a Twitter thing.
Yes.
On Sunday, and so I'm getting up to speed on the draft class so that I could have something intelligent to say by then about that. I don't start digging in until late April. And so probably put a little extra time on Saturday into trying to wrap up kind of my work there, and so I can have some observation on depending on where their ping pong ball shows up.
Yeah, you are not contractually required to dig in on prospects until later on. I'm in the process. I have some commitments beyond the Hawks to write about the draft and cover the draft. So I've done more than most by this point, but this is not a cycle where I was living and dying the whole way. During the rebuild years of the Hawks, I was basically spending my entire year doing lots more draft stuff than I do now, because it was also a big part of the Hawks stuff. Now, for a team that obviously had a weird / not that great season, they were still in the playoff mix all the way through. It wasn't like we knew they were going to be in the lottery until pretty late in the year. So a little bit less emphasis. And also, just as a spoiler for Sunday, not the most sexy draft class in the world. So we'll get into that later on. Anyway, our ostensible purpose on this discussion today, beyond the lottery, is to discuss Garrison Matthews. And we've been doing these player capsules, which I always appreciate you doing with me. And this is kind of the pivot towards guys who played a lot this year. All the ones we've done so far were either young guys who didn't play very much for various reasons, fringe guys who didn't play very much for, on-court reasons, etc. Garrison's kind of the pivot point where, yes, he wasn't a huge player most of the year, but he did play nearly like 1,000 minutes. He was a part of the rotation for the majority of the season, and everybody from here on the roster that we'll talk about played a lot, and that makes it easier. Also makes it a little bit more difficult. Garrison's kind of right in the middle where, obviously there's a ravenous appetite for us to talk about guys like Trey or DeJounte or Jalen or whatever. Garrison's like, you got to be kind of a sicko to want to dig on Garrison Matthews, but at the same time, he had a pretty nice season. We'll dig into it now, but as I kind of always do on these, what was your broad impression of Garrison this year in his 5th NBA season?
Yeah, it's funny because at the beginning of the season, I remember saying of all the players on the roster, where kind of the clock is ticking developmentally, I was like, he needs to play, right? For him, right? Didn't really know what that looked like in terms of where he'd fall in the pecking order throughout the season and all that sort of stuff. But I felt like here's a guy who needs an opportunity to play with it, and if he needs to be on a team where there's more opportunity to kind of step in, maybe one of the bottom 5 teams in the league and things like that. But turns out he got a good amount of playing time for the Hawks. So my first thought is I'm just glad he got the opportunity to play, and he improved a lot across the season. For sure, he was one of the best 3-point shooters in the league on percentage this season. We can talk a little bit about how dynamic his shooting is, and we can get into that. But then just sort of kind of just his defensive play, not the biggest guy, not the fastest guy, not the best kind of lateral athleticism, but he kind of learned how to be on time in the right place. You sacrifice his body a lot, and things like that. So I felt like he's a guy who kind of maximizes opportunity. And that's something that not everybody on this roster did this year. So I thought he made the most of what opportunity he got this year.
Yeah, he definitely did. And, it was age 27 season. He wasn't like a one and done prospect. Like he's a guy, it was his fifth year, but he's a veteran in age and experience level. He'll be 28 in October. He played 66 games. He finished 9th on the team in total minutes. And coming into the year, if you told me he was going to play the ninth most minutes on the Hawks, I would have been not totally fall on the floor stunned, but I would have been surprised. That was not the plan. And he did play well. We'll get into that. But clearly, I think everyone would probably admit, privately at least, the plan was not to have Garrison be 9th on the team in minutes this year. The combination of injuries, AJ Griffin's weird season that we talked about before, all that stuff led to Garrison playing more than he probably, quote unquote, should have, or maybe was projected to. Ended up making 5 starts. It was kind of a weird season too. We'll kind of go broad at the top here, but he barely played at all early in the year. I'm sure you remember that, but like coming out of the gate, AJ was still in the rotation the first few weeks of the season. He wasn't playing all that well, but he was playing. And Garrison appeared in only 3 of the first 14 games this season and never played more than 5 minutes in any of those games. So he was very much on the fringe of things, like the 12th, 13th kind of guy on the roster. And then from that point forward, he played in 62 of the final 66 games, including the final 32 games in a row. So he became a fixture every night, playing 19 minutes a game or so over the last 30-ish games. Like he was a fixture in the rotation. And, we could talk about his number one skill, which is his shooting. We could probably lead with that. But it is just worth noting to me, and I think emphasizing how much they needed him. I mean, I know this wasn't a season that anybody's satisfied with, but it got to the point pretty early in the year where it's like Garrison's now a vital part of the rotation. And not only because of the shooting, but this team, because of what happened with AJ and all the stuff around that, and the roster construction, losing Sadiq, even the way Sadiq shot the ball this year, they just needed more shooting. And Garrison, if nothing else, and he does provide other things, does provide shooting. Today's show is brought to you by Monopoly Go. And yes, I'm talking about Monopoly Go once again because there's so much good stuff in the Monopoly Go game. In Monopoly Go, too, with friends for time tournaments, where we work together to actually build up each other's boards. The more you work together, win together, the more awesome prizes you happen to unlock. And there's so much to unearth at Monopoly Go. You can get unique stickers that you can share with friends to complete albums for big prizes. You can also get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, or even hilarious emojis that you can use to taunt your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting each and every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton of that includes their unique mini games, like digging for treasures or robot pachinko machines. There also is new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you need to win and rent frenzies. There's also fun stuff to discover all the time at Monopoly Go. Get off the bench now and go. Download the app for free at Google Play or the App Store. Get off the bench right now. It's Game On with Monopoly Go. One more time, it's Monopoly Go. Download for free at Google Play or the App Store.
And it's not just like all the time toe on the line, like a real depth, like real spacing,
and hunts his shot.
And that absolutely hunts his shot and is willing to pull it from 5 to 6 feet behind the line, which really does kind of create more spacing on the inside when you have a shooter that can do that. Bogey does that. Gallo did that when he was in Atlanta. Trey obviously does his own version of that, and that's more pull up, right? But there's an aspect to his shooting there that's a little bit different than, like, you don't really see Sadiq do that. For example, you don't see Hunter do that, right? And so that aspect is just another kind of little wrinkle. I was in preparation for our discussion, I was thinking about, like, what is my thought about him becoming a greater volume shooter, right? Because the percentage obviously was like awesome, right, this year, right? Typically, to become a much, much higher volume shooter, you got to be able to kind of create your own shot. And that's the thing, is that he does rely a lot on catch and shoot. He has the dribble relocation. He has that move and that sort of stuff. But in terms of, like, you have a defender right in front of you and you have a skill package to kind of get to your step back or get to your pull up, that's not something that he's shown. And for fans that might be curious about, can we get his volume up? There's probably something developmentally in that area that he hasn't really shown any of, that would be required for him to get to be a much like volume shooter along the lines of Bogey can create his own shot at will, right? And that's not to say that Garrison will never do that, right? It's just that that's not something he's ever had the opportunity to do. He's never been prioritized in that way. He's never been in that kind of role in an offense. And so for me to think about kind of more volume, it'd be interesting to see if that looks a little different next year if he's back with the Hawks,
It's a good point. And, everyone knows the accuracy was incredible this year. He finished 4th in the league among qualified players in 3-point percentage, 44% on a pretty decent volume of shots. Obviously, he wasn't playing as much as some other guys that were near the top of that list, but, he still shot the heck out of the ball. And interestingly, as you kind of point out there as a bridge to a different part of this discussion, his volume on a per minute, per possession basis went down from last year and the previous year. He still took like 9.5 per 100 possessions, which is a good, healthy number, but that isn't like a crazy high number where you would maybe want it to be for a guy who I hate the word specialist sometimes, but he is trending towards a specialist. Like he's not necessarily, he could do a little bit more, but that's his main thing is the shooting. So in a vacuum, like I don't want to say like guys like Sam Merrill, I'm just watching the Cavs play a game right now. He's taking 13, 14, 15 per 100 possessions. Like guys who are tasked with exactly that get up. You want to get up a little bit more maybe than Garrison was able to take this year. Again, that's still a pretty healthy number, but 9.5 per 100 possessions is not crazy high, especially when you're taking 85% of your shots from 3, which is where Garrison was this year. And that's also his career number. It's about 85% of his shots. He does not like to take 2s. And he's not encouraged to take 2s. In his exit interview, I'm not sure if you heard the audio of this, but and I think it's a good goal. But he was asked like what he's been working on. I think I might even asked him honestly, but he was talking about how he wants to improve his floor game. They want him to improve his ball handling, all this stuff. And like you can see little glimpses of it, but in the end, he's still taking 85% of shots from 3, and he's flying off screens, wanting to shoot, and that's what his role is. But it is notable to me, like to get some of your volume up. There's 2 different ways to do it. Like Bogey's got different stuff. Like I think that the most common comparison, maybe casually taking a step back on this roster, is going to be Bogey to Garrison. Same position, shooters, all that stuff. 3-point shooting wise, fairly similar, but Bogey can obviously do a lot more off the dribble, create his own off the dribble, like you mentioned. And you don't necessarily want Garrison to cook off the dribble. Like no one's trying to make him be able to do that. But it's also the relocation, like you said. It's also decision-making, like the one dribble and a quick decision kind of stuff that you want your shooters to be able to do to be more of a threat. He can do that a little bit, but it's an interesting discussion. Like he had super, super small usage, like that usage, that all-encompassing usage number that you see on Basketball Reference or NBA.com. He was like, I think Cleaning the Glass had him as like 4th percentile in total usage, which basically means he's either shooting a 3 or he's not doing much of anything on offense. Like, and that's okay. There's room for that. But it's an interesting kind of like, what do you want him to be able to do? Because I think the only thing we could probably agree on is like, you want him to shoot more, if anything. But how do you get to that is an interesting question.
Yeah, and it felt like the last, I don't know, month and a half of the season, he was being coached like to actually attack a closeout and not just use the dribble relocation. And it all depends. Yeah, and it all depends on the angle of the closeout, all the size of the closeout defender. But Quinn talks a lot about breaking the paint, and he's not like Evers. Has he produced enough volume, kind of shooting in the paint, for us to have an opinion? I mean,
no. Just for reference, he took 1.6 2-point attempts per 100 possessions this year, and I think only a handful of those even were like at the rim. Like it's an accident when he takes it 2. And early in the year, I know you remember this. Like there was this like countdown of like when's he going to make a 2-point field goal, because he didn't make one for a long time because he only took them when it was a wide open layup. Basically, that was the only thing he was ever going to take inside the arc, or maybe a foot on the line on accident kind of jump shot. But he doesn't try to get to the rim really ever.
Yeah, but you saw him trying to lean a little bit into that the last 6 weeks of the season. And it's interesting because as defenses react to him, like you'd hope his first goal is break the paint, collapse the defense, kick it out. Break the paint, collapse the defense, kick it out. Right, that's what you're looking for there. And he's like, his processing is fine, is really, really good there. He reads the play, he reads the defensive movement, he reads the rotation, he can kick it out. I think if he's the guy who played more and more and more, and ever became a guy that, like, okay, when the Hawks second unit is on the floor, this is what we have to do with Garrison Matthews. It's let make him prove he can make a shot at the rim. And with the defender challenging that shot, and you did see a few games where it looked like opposing defenses were like, we're not rotating down help to stop Garrison Matthews when he attacks the paint, right? And you wonder, like, as he potentially kind of continues to stay a rotation player, how much kind of specific game planning kind of comes into that for him. He's a guy who's, coming into the season, probably never going to be a priority in other teams' kind of game planning kind of content. But he does have a very specific, number of kind of use cases offensively that you might want to think about, like, we're going to chase him off the line, make him make a shot in the paint, that sort of thing. And so, but for him to kind of work offensively, it is more than the shot. It is attack the closeout. It is quick decision. It is, Quinn talks about the 0.5, make a decision on what the right action is in half a second and go. And it didn't always look like super pristine, but I think that's what it looks like when a person is kind of leaning into a new area of their offensive game. It's okay, like, get the reps, try to get better, show some promise. And I would, thinking back, I don't remember there ever a time where it just looked like he was embarrassing himself. He looked like a guy who was just growing a new skill, and but he was, fairly solid, and especially in terms of break the paint, make the kick out pass. And that's where it'll pick up next season is, does he need a floater? Does he need to just go in and seek contact? He's very willing to embrace contact in every kind of context, right? And we can kind of talk about that on defense a little bit. But
we will.
but that might be, for him to, like, really kind of function as a scorer inside the 3-point line, getting to the free throw line has probably got to be something that he's got to kind of lean on more than, like, shot making at the rim or something like that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this year he was actually career low level in free throw creation, like on a per shot base. Like, he just did get to the line. Like, he used to get to the line more often. Some of that is swayed. Like, Garrison was kind of infamous, especially pre-Atlanta. If he was known for anything, he was known for drawing charges on defense and drawing 3-shot fouls on offense. Like, he's known for those things around the league, I mean. And rightly so, I would say. Garrison's not afraid to sell a 3-shot foul. He'll fall down. Yeah. He'll do all the stuff, and then he'll take a charge for sure. Like, he's got a super high rate of charge defense that we'll get into in a second. But he's
also just not a straight up and down shooter.
No, he's always flying off balance, and yeah,
exactly. And that allows him to tap into some creativity, maybe at times, to get that contact.
Yeah, it does. And also, for a guy who I think he's listed at 6'5", I think Garrison is generously 6'4". I've stood close enough to him. I don't think he's probably a full 6'5". If he was someone who had to be stand still, catch and shoot, like, he wouldn't probably be in the league. Like, the fact that he can do what he can do off the dribble and not necessarily off the dribble, coming off screens and off movement is what allows him to be effective. He's a real threat anywhere on the court as a catch and shoot guy. That's really helpful. So it's not like he's afraid. Like, to your point, he'll mix it up, but, like, he's not a very high assist guy. Like, he'll move the ball. He didn't turn the ball over at all this year, which is good. He had 19 turnovers in almost 1,000 minutes. That's an incredible ratio. Part of that is that you don't really, if you never dribble, it's hard to turn the ball over sometimes, but it's good. I mean, if you have the skill set that he has to not make mistakes on offense, which he doesn't really make mistakes, it's either going to be a shot or a swing pass, and you just get it going again. So that's a good thing. It's just, the volume of everything other than, I'm looking at all the numbers that I have in front of me. Like, his true shooting was actually really good. 67% true shooting this year. That comes down to obviously, when you're a 3-point specialist and you make all your threes, that's going to juice your numbers way up. But it's true. Like, he was extremely efficient this year while not doing a ton else. And I think that there is room for that. You never want to overstate what a guy says in an exit interview, but he was very clear what he wants to work on. And it's kind of everything else besides shooting. Like, he knows what he is there. So do the Hawks. And to your point, they were at least letting him, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, like, encouraging him to do a little bit more. Like, everybody knows the deal. I think Garrison knows the deal. Like, he knows what he is. It's just, but if you can do a little bit more in different areas, get to the line, an extra move or two, just make yourself more of a threat when the defense takes that one thing away. Because you said it earlier, but I want to circle back to it. You get into a playoff context. This team had one postseason game this year, and he didn't play that much in it. That'd be the first thing that an opposing team would do to Garrison. It's like, we're not going to let this guy shoot. And if he's there's still value in having the gravity to be guarded way out there, 28 feet from the rim. But if a team is actually going to game plan for you, because most of the time, if you're Garrison Matthews, you're not getting game planned for. Teams will know what you are in the scouting report. But in an actual series, like, hey, we're not going to let you guys let you shoot. What's your counter to that? And that might be the number one thing on offense for sure for him.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he had 19 turnovers. I wonder how many of them were on like kicking his leg out on 3-point shots. Like how many of them were offensive fouls? Yeah. You know, I should have
pulled that. You can find that number. I should have pulled that. We'll talk about that on defense in a second. But his foul rate is sky high, and I think a little bit of that anyway is offensive fouls.
Yeah. The other observation I had was, and I don't know if this was a factor of kind of playing a lot with DeJounte down the stretch, is that a guy like him. I mean, maybe he was being coached like to fill the lane, like in transition, like a traditional player. But guys like that at NBA level typically sprint to the corner. Like that, you know, Bogey does it all the time, right? And Bay does it all the time. But a lot of times he was, in that, slot, if you will, as opposed to kind of getting to the corner. And so, I'd be curious to know, like, if from him or Quinn's thinking like, no, we want you to sprint to the corner more, kind of create that spacing. Trey wants his shooter sprinting to the corner in transition all the time. But DeJounte takes a little bit of a different approach, offensively. He's going to press the front of the rim every time, like when he has the ball. And so maybe filling the lane is what DeJounte prefers to have from his guys. But it'll be interesting to see next year if it's more of an automatic sprint to the corner in transition, which is not what we always saw this year.
All right, that is all for part one with myself and Glen Willis talking all things Garrison Matthews. Stay tuned right now for part two of this conversation in your podcast feed of choice, Apple, Spotify, Overcast. We're also on YouTube, and this second part will be available right now. Please subscribe to the show. Please follow us on Twitter at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there as well at BT Rowland. Follow Glenn at Willis_Glenn. I appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. Stay tuned for part two, and we'll see you all next time.